Alright, so at this point, we've created very basic components for all of the pages in our application, and we can navigate between those pages simply by going up here to the top and typing in the path of one of our different pages. So if we type /articles, we'll see that the articles page shows up. Now this whole idea of typing in the path in a browser is probably something that our users aren't going to want to do. So it's very important that we allow our users to navigate between different pages by interacting with the site instead of actually having to go up here and know the specific path they want to go to. Now, the way that we do this, the way that we allow users to click certain elements and go to another page, in other words, the way that we add links to our site using React Router is by using a special component called the link component. Now, before we actually see how that component works, what we're going to do here is we're going to add a navigation bar to our application. So let's open up our directory over here. We're going to create a new file, and we'll call this file navbar. And notice that I'm creating this outside the pages directory here because, well, it's not a page. So the navbar component here, what we're going to do first is obviously define this component. So we're going to start off here by saying const navbar equals. And then this will be the body of our component here, of course. And then underneath this, we'll export our component by saying export default. That is navbar. Alright, now, for the body of this navbar, it's just going to be a very straightforward navbar that uses an unordered list element. So what it's going to look like, first of all, we'll have the nav semantic element as basically the wrapper for this navbar component. And then inside here, we're going to have our unordered list. And for each of the list items, these are going to be the links to the respective pages. So the first one that we're going to want to do is have a link to the home page. So we'll just say home here. Under that, we'll have a link to the about page. So we'll say li about. And after that, we'll have a link to the articles list page. So we'll say li. And this will just say articles. Now notice that we're not going to add a link to the article detail page because the article detail page is actually going to need to load a specific article and display that article's data. So in other words, even though it's one component, and it's actually going to be a lot of different pages, depending on the data that it displays. That's something that we'll look at later, so don't worry too much about it now. Alright, so now that we have our list here with all of the different pages that we want to link to, we're going to import that link component that I talked about from the React Router DOM package. So we'll say import, link from React Router DOM. And once we have that, we're basically just going to go through and wrap each of these links here, so home, about, and articles in this link component. So here's what that's going to look like. The link component, basically, all we do is we wrap whatever text we want to actually apply the link behavior to in this link component. Alright, so that's what it's going to look like for our home link. Now, in order to tell React where we want the user to go when they click on this link, all we have to do is add a prop called to. And we say to equals, and then we basically just specify what the actual path is that we want the user to be taken to when they click on this part of the screen. Okay, so let's do the same thing with about. We're going to say link to equals, and then we're going to say /about. And then we're going to put the about word in between those two link tags. And last but not least, we'll do articles. We're just going to say link to equals /articles, and then we're going to put the articles word in between those two tags as well. So let's go to the end here, paste it, and let's just adjust the indentation. And there we go. Okay, so we have our navbar now, and hopefully, all of the styling should line up nicely with our styles in our app CSS file that we copied and pasted. So we shouldn't have to make any adjustments there, but what we do have to do, now that we've defined our navbar component, is go into our app component and actually display this navbar component there. So what we're going to do is up here above the home page, we'll just import our navbar component. And then, we're going to come down here and remove the H1 heading that was there. Alright, and in its place, we're going to put our new navbar component just like that. So if we go back and take a look at our app now, we should see that our navbar is looking pretty nice, and it's got links to home, about, and articles up here. So let's try clicking on each of these. If we click on articles, well, we're already on the articles list page, so let's try another one. If we click on the home route, for example, we'll see that that takes us directly to the home page. If we click on about, that'll take us to the about page. And if we click on articles, that will take us to the articles list page. Alright, so that's how we use React Router DOM's link component to link users to different pages. And if I do say so myself, this is a big improvement over the previous practice of having to type in the URLs up here at the top of our browser. Okay, so now that we've added this lovely nav bar to our application, the next thing that we're going to want to do is actually start implementing the article page. Now, remember that the article page, what was different about it, if we go back to our app component where we defined our routes, what was different about this is that it had this little URL parameter thing here. Now, URL parameters are generally used in React and we want a single component to be able to display multiple different pages, right? So for our article page, it's a single component. But we're going to want this to be able to display all of the different articles in our application as if we had one page for each article in our app. So what this means is that what we're going to need to do is take this article ID when we're inside our article page component and use that to load the data for the correct article that matches this ID. You'll see what I mean in just a minute if that doesn't make too much sense. So anyway, what we're going to do is open up our article page, and before we can actually load data and display it inside this article page, what we're going to need to do is import some fake article data that we can use to display, alright? So what I'm going to recommend you do. This is going to be very similar to what we did with our CSS file where we just copied and pasted it from the GitHub repo for this course. You're going to want to find the exercise files or the GitHub repo for this course and look for a file inside the pages directory called article content. Alright, articlecontent.js is where that is. So what I'm going to do is create a new file in here with that same name. There we go, new file articlecontent.js. And I'm just going to copy and paste that entire file content from GitHub. And what we'll see is we have all of this content that we can now use to display in our article page. Alright, so first of all, though, let's take a look at all of these articles. So this is an array, this articles thing that we're exporting from this file. It's an array of article data. Each of these is going to be its own JSON object and it has a name property, a title property and a content property. Now, the name property is going to be the unique ID that will identify each of these articles, and that's what we're going to be using in the URL parameter. The title. This is going to be what we end up displaying at the top of the page, obviously. This is a user-friendly version of the name here. And then the content, what this is an array of all of the paragraphs in our article, right? So you can see that each article basically just has 3 paragraphs and it's all currently lorem ipsum, so this is where you're going to have to write your content and fill it out if you want to start your own blog. So now that we have these articles, what we're going to need to do is go back to our article page and we're going to need to use the URL parameter value to load and display the correct article from this article content file that we just created. So, first things first, let's figure out how to actually get the value of the URL parameter in the URL. So let's say that the user is at localhost 3000/articles/learn node. Well, what we're going to need to do is get this string right here and use that to load the correct article from article content. So the first step in that is getting the value of this URL parameter. And what we're going to need to do for that is use a special hook that's provided for us by the React Router DOM package. And that hook is called useparams. So we're going to want to say import useparams from React Router DOM, and then we're going to go down here and say const params equals useparams, and that's all we need to do. So params currently is an object whose keys are, let me just go back and take a look at the URL parameter here, are the names that we've given URL parameters. So for article ID here, the key in that object is going to be article ID and the value is going to be whatever the current string is at this part of the URL. So if we go back now to our article page, what we're really going to want here is the article ID property of params. So we can say const article ID equals params.article ID. Or if you want to shorten this up, you can use object E structuring and say const article ID equals params like that. Or if you want to shorten it even more, you can just skip the params thing and say const article ID and get that directly from the used params hook. Alright, so now that we have this, let's just make sure that that value is what we think it is. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is say this is the article page for the article with ID, and we're just going to insert the value of article ID into the DOM. OK, so let's go back to our application in the browser and see if this works. What we're going to do is go to /articles/ and then we'll just try learn node, perhaps. And sure enough, we see this is the article page for the article with ID learn node. If we try something like learn React, which is another ID of the articles that we copied and pasted, you'll see sure enough that we have that value. And really if there's anything that we want to type in, right, we could just type in a random long number here and hit enter and we'll see that that value is displayed there, as well. So, currently our application isn't really paying attention to whether or not this URL parameter value is valid. So what we're going to need to do now is use this article ID to actually load the correct article from article content, and the way that we're going to do that, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to say import articles from article content, and we're just going to use JavaScript's built-in find function to find one of these articles by some sort of criteria. So the way that this is going to work is we're going to say const article equals articles.find. And we're going to say that we want to find the article whose name property is equal to article ID. So we'll say article.name is equal to article ID, and that should give us the matching article if there is one. If there isn't one, well, we'll deal with that later. But currently we have the article, so what we can do now is we can just remove this h1 heading, which we don't need anymore, and replace it with the actual article content. So what this is going to look like, we're just going to say h1 and we'll display the article title by saying article.title. And underneath that, we're going to loop through all of the paragraphs in the article content, right? Remember that this content property is just an array of the paragraphs in our article. So we're going to loop through each of those by saying article.content.map. And for each paragraph, we're just going to return a paragraph tag with the paragraph content inside of that. Now, you're going to notice that we're getting a little bit of a syntax error here. We see that red line, and that's because in React, you can't return more than one top-level element from a component, right? We see that we have not only this h1 tag, but we're also returning all of these paragraph tags. So in situations like this, what we need to do is wrap this in what's called a React fragment. And that simply looks like this. It's just an empty tag, and all we need to do is put whatever content we want to be displayed in this component inside the React fragments, right? So this is just a little bit of a syntax helper that helps React know, okay, I'm going to need to display all of these elements, that there is really more than one top-level element here. So now that we're displaying the article's content, we should be able to go back into our browser and take a look at this. And of course, we're going to need to actually use a matching name. So let's try learn React, which is a matching ID for one of our articles. And sure enough, we should see that the content for that article shows up, and we see the fastest way to learn React, and we see all of the content displayed for our article. Now, if we want to go to learn node, instead, which is another matching article, we'll see that we have the content for that one instead. And last but not least, if we say, learn MongoDB, and oops, it looks like that wasn't the name of it. Let's try just MongoDB. I believe that was. And sure enough, we see the content show up for learn MongoDB. Okay, so we've seen now that our articles list page can be used to display all of the different articles, and it's doing this using a single component that simply swaps out the data for all of the articles as the ID changes. And this is a very, very common pattern in React applications, and it can be tremendously useful, since again it means we don't have to actually create a separate page for each page on our website. We can just have a single component that does all of that for us. Alright, so now that we have our articles page working and displaying the correct content, depending on the URL parameter up here at the top of our browser, the next thing that we're going to want to do is actually implement our articles page so that we can see a list of all of the articles on our site and be able to click on them and go to the corresponding article page for that article. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is go back to our IDE and open up our articles list page. And what we're going to do is replace the current content that's in that page with, well, first of all, we'll add the title, which will be H1, and we'll just say articles. And then underneath that what we're going to do is actually loop through all of the articles on our site, so in other words, all of the articles in this articles array, and display those in a list underneath it, that, again, users will be able to click on and go to the corresponding article. So, first things first, let's import that article content from our article content file. We're just going to say import articles from article content. And here, let's just change these to single quotes for consistency. And once we've done that, all we're going to need to do is inside our articles list page, we'll say articles.map. And for each article, what we're going to want to do is just display a little square that contains the article's title and a sample of its content. You'll see what that looks like in just a minute here, but basically we're just going to need to wrap this inside a div of some sort. So we'll say div, and then inside here we'll have an h3 heading that will contain the article's title. So we'll just say article.title for that. And under that for the article sample, what we're going to do is have a paragraph tag and we're going to get the first, so let's say 150 characters of the article content to display just as a sort of teaser to let users know what the article is about and kind of what its writing style is like, sort of like you'd see on other blog websites. So for this, what we're going to do is say article.content. And since content is going to be an array of all of the paragraphs in the article, we're going to just want to get the first paragraph by saying index 0 and then we'll say .substring. And we're going to want to get a substring from 0 to 150, which will give us the first 150 characters of that article's content. Okay, so this should give us a nice article content followed by a little sample of the article. The next thing that we're going to need to do is correct this same error that we were seeing in our article page, right? We're trying to display more than one top-level element in this component. So what we're going to need to do is just wrap this in React fragments. So we'll just write those up there and put the content of our articles list page inside of that. And as you can see, that's made the little red squiggly line go away. So let's take a look at this now. And what we're going to see is that sure enough we have all of our articles in a nice little list here, and each of these is displaying a sample of the text. Oh, one last thing that we should do is just display ... after this as well, just so the user knows that there is more content after whatever the sample is that they're seeing. So we'll just add that right there, and sure enough we see that that appears at the end of the sample. Cool. So the last thing that we need to do in order to make our articles list page work in the way we want it to is link each of these items in the list to its corresponding article. Now, we've already seen how to do this from the navbar using the link component provided for us by the React Router DOM package, and that's what we're going to use here as well. So let's just say import link from React Router DOM. And then we'll go down here and we're just going to replace this div now with a link, and we'll get to the to prop in just a minute here. Alright, so it's now a link, which is great. So now we just need to link each of these items to the article that it corresponds to. And all we need to do for that is just say to. And then instead of just specifying a hard-coded string, we're actually going to use curly braces here, and we'll use backticks as well just because this allows us to insert the values of variables into a string. And what we're going to do is link the user to /articles/, and then after this is going to come the ID or the name of the article. So we'll just say article.name. And that should successfully link the user to the article with that corresponding ID, alright? So we're basically just filling in that section of the URL parameter. So if we go back to our browser now, what we'll see is that everything is now highlighted that nasty shade of purple. We'll fix that in just a minute by adding a class to our link. But what we should be able to do now is click on any one of these and see that it takes us to the same page that it corresponds to, alright? So if we click on fastest way to learn React, sure enough React will come up. If we click on learn Node, sure enough Node will come up. You get the idea. So now that we've done this, let's actually just go back here and adjust the styling. And all that we need to do for that, because we've already copied and pasted the styles into our app CSS file, is add class name equals and then we're going to set this to article list item like so, okay? So if we go back now, we should see that the styling is much better and we even have these nice little borders in between all of our articles. And if we click on any one of these, it will still work in just the same way as you can see. Now, one last thing that we need to do. Whenever we display a list in React, well, first of all, let me just show you this here. If we open up the inspector window in our browser and open up the console, what you're going to see is that there's actually quite a lot of warnings being logged out to our console. Now, if you read these warnings, you're going to see that it says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And well, it can't get much more self-explanatory than that. Basically, whenever you use map in React or really anything that is going to dynamically change the length and order of the list, you're going to need to add a key prop to the outermost element in the list, such as this link, in our case, that has a unique value. So in our case, each article has a unique ID or name property that we use to identify the article for the URL parameter. So we're just going to pass that to the key as well, alright? So we'll say article.name. And we should be able to go back now to our browser, open up the inspector window and open up the console. And if we hit refresh, all of those errors should go away, alright? So that's just something we need to remember whenever we display a list in React. And you may be remembering now that we did the same kind of thing in the content for our article page. So what we're going to need to do, first of all, if you open up the inspector here and go to the console, you'll see that we get the same error. What we're going to need to do is go back to our article page and add a key prop to each of these paragraphs we're displaying. Alright, now, in this case, each of the paragraphs doesn't really have a good unique property to it that we can use. So what we can actually do is just use the entire paragraph itself. And what that's going to look like, is we'll just say key equals paragraph. And if we go back and take a look at that now and refresh, we'll see that that will get rid of the error. However, there is actually a better way to go about this, and that is since our paragraphs aren't going to change in order, and we're not going to be removing paragraphs or adding new paragraphs as the user is navigating through our React app, we can actually just use the index in this case for our paragraphs. So all we need to do for that is just add the second argument to the map function and change this to key equals I. And what this is going to do now is just use whatever the index is of the paragraph as that paragraph's unique key. And this is generally not something you want to do if the list is ever going to change, right? You wouldn't want to do this in, let's say, a to-do list, because in that case, some weird things could happen when React tries to update the list and make it look nice. But anyway, this also gets rid of the error, and that's all we need to do for now for our articles list page. Okay, at this point, we have our articles list, and each of the items in this list is linked to the corresponding article. So before we move on, there's one more thing that I want to do with this articles list. And that is, I want to turn it into a reusable component. Because currently we just have this list defined inside our articles page or articles list page, that is. And if we wanted to display anything else like this in our application, let's say that we wanted to add a related articles list to the bottom of our article page, or maybe we wanted to add a top articles, or most popular articles list to our homepage, well, currently there's not really a way to do that besides just copying this articles.map thing and pasting it into the other components that we want to use it in. And that's obviously not taking advantage of React and its reusable component structure. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a separate articles list component. So what you're going to want to do is open up your directory over here on the left. And instead of putting this in with the pages, what we're actually going to do is create a new folder with the name, components. And basically this folder is just going to contain all of the reusable components in our application that we use in multiple pages. So inside this components folder now, what we're going to do is create a reusable component for our articles list, and what we're going to call it is articleslist.js. Okay? So creating this articles list is going to be pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is copy and paste this DOM structure from our articles list page. We're just going to copy that and we'll create our component here by saying const articles list equals, and then for the body of the component we're going to say return, and paste that DOM structure in there. Now, a few things about this. First of all, we need to surround this in a React fragment since we're trying to return more than one top-level element from this list. So, let's just add these things and put our articles.map inside of there like so. And once we've done that, we're going to also need to somehow get these articles into our articles list. So the most obvious way to do this would be to simply copy this import line from articles list page and paste it at the top of articles list. And voila! We now are able to display our articles inside our articles list. However, this isn't actually the way that we're going to do it. And here's why: if we simply import all of our articles into this component and display them like this, that doesn't give us any flexibility to display different groups of articles in this component on different pages. The example I used before was on our homepage. We might want to display the most popular articles on one of our article pages. We might want to display an articles list with some of the related articles, etc. So if we're just importing this articles directly into this file, then we're not really going to be able to change what articles are being displayed in the component. And it's therefore not really a very reusable component. So what we're going to do instead is actually accept the articles as a prop in this articles list. And to do that we just need to add curly braces and articles there. And what this will allow us to do is basically pass the articles that we want this component to display in as a prop. So if we go back to our articles list page now and import this, and actually first let's export this by saying export default articles list. If we go back to our articles list page now and import that by saying import articles list from components articles list, then what we can do is simply remove all of this articles.map stuff that we had there before and replace that with articles list. And now we just need to pass the articles that we want to display here, which in this specific case is all of the articles from article.content. Then we can just say articles equals articles and pass those articles in as a prop. So if we go back and take a look at our application now, oops, we're going to see that there's an error, and that's because we forgot to import this link component into our articles list. So what we can actually do is just cut this out of the articles list page file and paste it in articles list. And that should get rid of that error. So let's save it and go back and take a look, and sure enough we're going to see that everything is pretty much the same and everything works just like before. But now we have this thing in a reusable component so that we can display it on the homepage if we wanted to. We can display it on the individual article pages if we want related articles, and just in general it makes our app's code much more flexible to split it into really as many components as possible. Or let me rephrase that and say, as many components as practical, right? You don't want to split up your app into too many components, but at the same time you really want to take advantage of situations like this where you can actually save yourself a lot of work down the road. Okay, so at this point, the main functionality of our application, being able to browse through the articles and actually click on the article and read the article on a page, that functionality is pretty much done, as well as some of the other important functionality like being able to navigate to different pages. However, there are still two main things that we need to finish here before we move on to implementing the backend. The first thing is that we need to actually implement the home page and about page here because currently, they really don't contain any content whatsoever. And the second thing is that we need to make sure that when a user goes to a route that doesn't exist, like this one, that we have some kind of not found page to show them, and do so at the right time. This will also apply to the articles page when the user tries to go to an article that doesn't exist. So those are the two things we're going to be taking a look at here. Let's do the first one. And this one's going to be pretty straightforward because all I'm going to have you do is copy and paste the content for the home page and the about page from GitHub, just like we did with the app CSS file and the article content file. So what we're going to do is just open up the homepage.js file. And we're going to copy all of the JSX from GitHub. So it's really just a lot of lorem ipsum with heading at the top. I just thought I'd save you the trouble there of generating all of that text. And really, for the About page, we're going to do the exact same thing. The only difference is that, instead of saying, "Hello, welcome to my blog," at the top, we're just going to change this text to say something like, "About me." Alright, and that's really all we need to do to implement the home page and About page. If we go back now and take a look at our application, we'll see that it looks pretty good. Again, you might want to add something like top-rated articles or something down here. And on the About page, maybe you want to add a picture of yourself. But overall, these two pages are as good as they need to be at this point. So the next thing that we're going to do is take a look at how to create and display the Not Found page. Now, if we go back to our IDE, remember that we already have the Not Found page file created. So really, all we have to do is come up with some kind of very simple component that says, page not found. So all we're going to need to do here is say, const not found page equals. And then what we're going to do is for the JSX, we're just going to have an H1 heading that says, 404, page not found. And that's it. Now, one thing that I do want to mention as well, this has been the case for a lot of the components that we've looked at so far, is when you have a simple component like this one, where really the only body of the function is just the return statement with the JSX in it, you can actually simplify this quite a bit by removing the return keyword and also removing the curly braces around the function. And then the component is just defined in between these parentheses here, so you can put whatever JSX you want in those parentheses. And it's just a little bit of a shorter, more readable syntax when your component is very simple like this one. So that's what we're going to do for our Not Found page. And the same thing, by the way, would apply to like our home page. If we open that up here, you can see that the only statement in this function is the return statement. So we can just remove the return keyword. Remove the curly braces, and then remove the other curly brace here. And we'll just adjust the indentation of everything here like so. And there we go. So our homepage is now a lot simpler than it was before, and you can do this on other pages if you want to. So now, let's head back to our Not Found page, and we're just going to say export default Not Found page. And that's pretty much all we need to do for the page itself. So now, we need to make sure that this page is displayed whenever the user goes to a route that we don't have a corresponding page for. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is open up our app component. And after all of the routes that we've currently defined, we're just going to add another route. And the path for this route is going to be the asterisk character. Alright, so basically what this tells React Router is that we want this route to be displayed on all routes, except for the ones that we've defined up above. Alright, so for the element here, we're going to want to add the Not Found page, which we'll just have to import here in a minute. So let's go up to the top, and we'll say import not found page from pages/not found page. And for some reason, that didn't autocomplete for me. So let's just go back here and make sure that I did all the right stuff. And yep, sure enough, it looks like it was right. I guess my IDE's autocorrect is just not working there. So now that we have the not found page, we're going to go back down and add that for the element. We're just going to say not found page like so. And that's pretty much all we should have to do. So let's go back and test this out. We're going to open up our app, and we're going to try and go to a route that doesn't exist. And sure enough, what we should see is that it says page not found. Alright, now another place that we're going to want to do this, remember, is on the articles page. And what you'll see is currently, if you go to an article that doesn't exist, if you input an article ID that we don't have a matching article for, well, at this point, it breaks the app. And that's because if you go back and take a look at the article page, we're just going to open that component up here. Remember that the logic here basically involved finding an article from this articles array, and then going through and saying article.title, article.content, etc. And well, the problem with this is if we don't find an article that matches this criteria here, article is going to be undefined. Now, when you try and say something like undefined.title in JavaScript, that throws an error, and that's why you're seeing that you just get a blank screen. And if you open up the inspector window and go to console, you'll see, cannot read properties of undefined reading title, which is exactly what I just explained there. So what we're going to need to do is, basically, before we just go displaying all of this stuff and assuming that article exists, we'll need to check and see if we actually found an article in the first place. So what we're going to want to do is if we didn't find an article, so we'll say, if not article, then we're not going to want to display the article content down here. What we're going to want to do instead is display the not found page. So let's just import the not found page up here. We'll say import not found page from, and then this is going to be /notfoundpage. And what we're going to do is inside this if statement, we'll just say return, and then have the not found page tag like so. Okay, now the reason that we don't have to have an else clause here, we don't have to have an else block for this if statement, is that when we say return from inside a React component, nothing after that is going to get executed. So if the article doesn't exist, we're just going to return the not found page, and that will be the end of the component. None of this other stuff down here is going to be returned or even executed. So that's all we need to do. Let's go back and make sure that this works. If we open up our application, what we should see now, if we refresh the page, is that it displays 404, page not found, when there's not a corresponding article for a given ID. If we go to Learn React, let's say, then sure enough, we see that the article still gets displayed. So that's how to create and display not found pages. And that really completes the front end of our app. So the next thing that we're going to be taking a look at is how to create the back end.